You're going to notice that the music today on the show is a little, dare I say, a little hipper. I spent like 4 hours on Saturday going through the lists of the best songs of 2024 by the New York Times 3 music critics. And for example, this is a song I didn't know that I really liked a lot. And I'd like to think that 4 hours was 4 hours well spent. I don't have that much time that I can just sort of allocate any way that I want to. And this was some of it. But anyway, you will notice that this is Ask or Tell Me Anything, which means you can call in at 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Lake Como Dave is already on the line. I got a couple of quick things I want to just go over before we get to Lake Como Dave. One of them has to do with music. So if you're ever at the Unionville Stop and Shop late on a Saturday night and there's this kind of disheveled and somewhat anxious looking man there, that's me. Okay? Or if you think you see me, that you probably are seeing me there. So I was there on Saturday night, circa 9 p.m. And I noticed that on the PA system, they were playing Pump It Up by Elvis Costello. And I was thinking about how that's not a song that would have been played on supermarket music systems, probably even 30 years ago. Because you think about that kind of music, and it was this kind of twitchy, urgent music. Elvis in his early days, that was his whole thing. He wasn't punk. He was way too melodic and literate to be punk. But, it's just it's a song that's meant to rattle you a little bit, which is not typically how. Maybe it's not meant to rattle. Maybe they think it inspires people to go out and just buy even more oatmeal or something. But one of the things that I thought about it at the time, too, not at the time, but recently, all right, sometime in between at the time and recently, there was a period sometime in this early part of the century where I was occasionally asked to get up on stage with a band called OPM, which stood for Other People's Music, but I think they also enjoyed the fact that it sounded like opium. And when they did that song, I was the lead vocalist. And the problem with Pump It Up is that the lyrics, and this is in general, I think, something about the transition from the American songbook to rock. If you're singing lovely, never change, keep that breathless charm, won't you please arrange it? The way you look tonight, there's sort of one thought goes to the next thought. Things flow from each other. There's an orderly sequence through some of the thoughts in a typical American songbook, like, Dorothy Field's lyric, or Ira Gershwin, or Cole Porter, or Lorenz Hart, or Oscar Hammerstein. These songs, they kind of, they make a certain amount of internal sense. Whereas Pump It Up includes such lines as, out in the fashion show, down in the bargain bin, you put your passion out under the pressure pin, fall into submission, hit and run transmission, no use wishing now for any other sin. There's no way to memorize that. There's no way to sort of intuit it. You either have memorized it the way you would memorize a sequence of numbers, or you don't know it. And sometimes with OPM, the lead guitarist would have to lean over, because if you get lost in that song, there's no way to get back. The guitarist would have to kind of help me out. But anyway, just sort of thinking about that change, that I'm not casting asparagus on either side. I'm just saying that one of the innovations of rock was suddenly musical lyrics could be things that you had to puzzle over and didn't necessarily have to speak to some recognizable set of experiences, which makes them harder to learn. Okay, that's my first insight of the day. And it's just weird to hear that song at Stop and Shop on a 9:30 on a Saturday night. Number 2, I do want to mention that I had an IEM it was sort of kind of around this time last week. Maybe Tuesday of last week. So an IEM is something invented by Frank Skinner. It's called an idiotic eureka moment. It's when you realize something that everybody else already knew. And if you recall, like at the beginning of last week, it was really cold. It would, in the morning, it would be 16 degrees with a wind chill. I'm talking about some serious Garrett Argianis emergency stuff. And, Garrett Argianis is great as a meteorologist because he tells you stuff. He just doesn't say it's going to rain. He says you might want to have an umbrella. So one thing I don't think Garrett has ever addressed, and I'm 70 years old and I didn't realize it until I had an idiotic eureka moment, and I am maybe last Tuesday, which is that all things being equal in terms of materials and stuff like that, mittens are quite a bit warmer for your hands. They keep your hands warmer than gloves do. I had not realized. I had not realized that. I sort of thought, in fact, I didn't even understand why mittens were. Why are mittens? They just seem to me like kind of stupider gloves, like just, gloves that could do less. It didn't occur to me that mittens exist because they keep your hands warmer. So that was pretty exciting. Like, I ordered some mittens right away. I got mittens now. It took me to the age of 7 to understand that I needed them. So if you have any IEMs, like something that you suddenly realized that everybody else already knew, like, maybe you suddenly realized that the alphabet song, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and Baa Baa Black Sheep are all the same melody. Something like that, or something that just was a secret to you, but not to anybody else. Love to hear about that today, but you can call about whatever you want to talk about. And what was the last thing? The last thing was quadrangles. I can wait. I can wait with quadrangles. I mean, may not even talk about them today. Although Kat Shen, while I was in the break room getting coffee, Kat Shen asked me an interesting question. She said, have you ever done a show, like a subsequent episode, about things that came up on Ask or Tell Me Anything, like one thing that somebody said? And I feel like that might have happened. I couldn't really name it. But today could be the day, too. Somebody could say something, and Lily Tyson could say, hey, we should do a whole show about that. Here's Lake Como Dave. He might be the person who does it right away from beautiful Lake Como, Ohio. Here's Dave. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Colin. You talked about Great American Songbook. I think these days that only means Rod Stewart and maybe Linda Ronstadt to most people. And if you wander into a nursing home for any reason, it's about to switch over from the Sirius 70s channel, probably in a couple of years, to the Sirius 80s channel. That's about where we're at.
That'll be tough. I mean, I for a long time realized that it was going to be weird when I was, maybe 80 in a nursing home and my fellow boomers all around me, we would be sitting in assisted living or something like that. And over the speakers we go, it's the honky tonk women. I'm thinking, it's just not going to, going to be weird because we're not going to be in that frame of mind, but that'll be the music everybody knows. Anyway, you have the floor.
And before I get to that question, my last comment about that is, for work, I go into these facilities fairly often, and the high point so far was going into a nursing home with 90-somethings and hearing a Muzak instrumental version of Love Shack. That was...
How could you even do that? I mean, Love Shack barely has a tune.
Yeah.
All right. Now I want to hear that. And the maestro, Dylan Reyes, is going to be researching this. He's going to locate an instrumental version of Love Shack. Anyway, what was your actual topic?
So my pipsqueak question for today is, now that this sort of Prague spring is about to end that we've been living in for a while, I'm kind of wondering, with the hammer about to come down after the 20th, is it going to be a little bit better for a time to live in a blue state? Or given that the greatest pleasure for MAGA types is always to take the libtards to the woodshed, are blue states going to be punished more, and will it be a worse place to be? It's kind of a strange question, but we're thinking about it.
Right. And actually, Lily Tyson points out that in The Atlantic, and maybe even today, there's an article about liberal preppers, which, is sort of kind of two words that typically didn't go to. There's a guy named Hayward who listens to the show sometimes who is kind of a liberal prepper, or at least a moderate prepper, but mostly preppers are kind of conservative. I think that there's no clear answer to that. So much of it depends on the specifics of any person's situation. And a lot of it depends on things you would really miss if they went away. So, for example, in my own family, there's somebody in my family orbit who's heavily reliant on Medicaid. And I think there are going to be attempts to either overthrow or drastically modify Medicaid. I think blue states will probably try to hold the line a little bit to whatever extent they have control over their destiny. So you think about something like that. You think about the things that you care about and what's most likely to happen to them and whether or not a blue state a blue state and its governor and its legislature is willing to, at least at the level of the state, fight for something that's meaningful and important. And maybe that's worth staying for. I think, and the flip side of that is if you were living in a red state or thinking about living in a red state, what's the thing that really could go drastically wrong, either in terms of government services or just in terms of how government, you might not want to live near the, former wilderness preserve where they're drilling now. So I think everybody has to kind of answer that question for themselves. I understand the nature of the question. And yeah, there might be some attempt to punish blue states. But I think so much of it depends on how somebody perceives punishment. And resources will be directed to red states, but a lot of those resources will be for environmental predation. And maybe you don't want to live in the state where, they're getting to do a whole lot of things they shouldn't be doing in the first place. So is that a sufficiently wishy-washy answer?
Well, it's a wishy-washy question, but, it's just obviously you kind of know what our direction as far as where we're looking to move to. And I'm just hoping there'll be something left when we get there. There's, as you mentioned, so many things in our lives, not just government programs, but just nice things, nice places to go to and visit, nice bookstores and whatever. Mm-hmm. There's fewer and fewer and fewer of them than there were compared to 10 years ago, and that's going to accelerate. I just wonder, of the cultural landscape, will it be just completely grim?
Well, I think the other part of that is, it assumes a kind of stasis. And I don't think the stasis has to be the case. One of the things that I hope people do, once they get over the shock, and I think people are still in a little bit of shock about the moment that we find ourselves in, is you have to start making things that you want. You make and collaborating with other people in your blue state or your red state about the things that you want that you think are important. If there are cultural things that you think are imperiled, or if there's a bookstore that you're worried about. First of all, the first thing you need to do is support that bookstore. But also, I think people have to understand it's our job to make a thing. And that thing could be some kind of collaborative effort to create, a better, like a collective healthcare enterprise or something, pretty complicated and geeky and administrative like that. Or it could be to create a different model for arts funding, or a way that arts organizations can also act collectively on their collective behalfs. I think we have to assume the troubling times are ahead, but it's also on us. You have to kind of build the world you want to live in. And I know that's hard to do, particularly when there's resistance to it, but I think that's the job. But Lake Como Dave, thanks so much for your call. And we're going to go to Linda and then to Mike. And we've got Anthony in New Haven, who's always very interesting. And so let's go to Linda first here, though. Hi, Linda in Simsbury.
Hello, Colin. How are you?
I am just fine.
I caught part of Friday's show where you were talking about Elvis. And all weekend I've been thinking about a specific thing that happened in my house as a kid. And so my sister is 10 years older than me, so her music when she was in her teens was my, really toddler and young music. And my sister was, quiet and shy, really pretty, and my father was completely unprepared for the effect that Elvis could have on her. And so in the house, while she was getting crazy about Elvis. He would grumble if she asked for money for an album. He played the albums over and over. There was discord in the house, and just by osmosis, as a little one, you pick up that the trouble is directed towards Mary and this Elvis guy. Mm. So. But then my father also had me, who was just, like 4, 5, 6 years old. And I remember driving in my grandmother's car. And with my sister Mary, it was all negative. And there was nothing that made my father more angry than hearing Elvis again. So then we're in the car. And he and I, he's explaining radio waves and air waves and vibration and this and that. And Elvis comes on, Love Me Tender. And we had pulled over at my grandmother's. He turns it up and he takes my hand and he puts my hand by the speaker in the center of the dashboard, and he says, "You feel that? That's Elvis's voice." Because you could feel the vibration from these old speakers, and I thought it was true. I thought it was actually Elvis's voice coming through. And he threw his head back laughing, like, with me? Because I was out of danger zone.
Right. So, yeah, that's,
And
I think your sister probably would have been very eager to feel the vibrations that Elvis was giving out.
Oh, absolutely.
But see, that in that story, what's interesting is that, Elvis is kind of a metonymy or a synecdoche or something for your sister's sexuality. Like whatever age she is now, your father doesn't want her yet to experience sexuality. And there's no obvious target for it anyway, or no kind of inciting force for it until Elvis comes along. And Elvis is kind of a permission structure at that time too. People don't understand how desexualized public behavior and public discourse was. And so, obviously Frank Sinatra in his own way, in his own time, had a very comparable effect on young women. But it wasn't, there wasn't, pelvis gyrating kind of stuff. And I think that's whatever is new freaks out your parents, right?
Right. But it was sexual. That's the key to it.
Yes,
sure.
and dads don't want their daughters probably ever to have any kind of sexual feelings. So just somehow or other magically produce grandchildren at the appropriate time. Well, thanks for that story, Linda. It's a great story. Let's go over to Mike in Woodbury. Let me also remind you that the number here is 888-720-9677, 888-720-WNPR. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Colin. So when I go to the movies in a theater, I sit through all of the end credits, all the way to the very end. And the end credits now in movies are longer than they have ever been.
Mm-hmm.
Even like 5 or 10 years ago, they list everybody, every single visual effects artist, every musician who on the score. It goes on forever. And sometimes I'm the only one that stays, and sometimes there's like maybe 2 or 3 other people. Full disclosure, I used to work in the movie business, so I'm not exactly your average film goer, but I think that it's just sort of respect to see people that worked really hard on these things. Plus, where was it shot? I always find something interesting. However, when you stream a movie, they cut it off. They cut them off right away, like after maybe like the main, the director and the producer, the writer and everything, the main cast. Now you can watch them, but you have to. But all the streaming services have a different way of doing that, and you have to be really quick to the draw. Sometimes there's like a box in the lower range. According to this, says watch credits, which is the best. But sometimes that you just see the credits up, in the upper right in the little box, and sometimes there's nothing, and you have to figure out with your remote, you hit the back button or something. So why don't they just let you turn the damn thing off? If you don't want to watch the credit instead of,
Well, they're trying to, their whole model is engagement. So they want to keep you engaged. They want to keep you going to something else. They don't want you to leave. They don't want you to go over to some other streaming platform. So that's the reason that they're doing it. But I totally agree with you. And there's sometimes I'm watching a movie on Netflix or something, and I'm thinking near the end, I bet I knew who the best boy was on this. I think right. I recognize that kind of gaffing kind of work there. I want to see who the head gaffer was. But sometimes you just want to go, was that Jessica Hecht? Is that who played that part? And before they even show the actor credits, it's like, God.
Now, Marvel, however, so if it's a Marvel movie, a lot of people stay because Marvel adds usually a little kicker like about the next story in the Marvel universe.
Well, what they typically do what Marvel does is they often have kind of a double punch in the credits. Midway through the credits, you might see something, and it is something sometimes about the next iteration. Sometimes it's a little kind of callback joke about things, and then typically at the end of the credits. They might also offer you some other little Easter egg or some little lagniappe, and I think that is really good. I'm pretty sure it was my friend David, my high school friend David, who also, like you, worked in the movie business. But even before he worked in the movie business, we would go to a movie and people would start to get up and gather their belongings and start talking and everything. And he'd go, "The movie isn't over yet. Why are they doing that? The movie isn't over. It's like people The people who drive me nuts are the people at a play who get up during the ovation and leave. It's like, it's not really quite over until the cast walks off the stage and the lights come up. You can't leave now. But I think also in terms of movies, now everybody thinks, or probably the streaming platforms even think, if they really care about this, they'll look it up on their phones. But we don't want to look it up on our phones, right, Mike? We want to see it on the screen. That's what we were doing. Right. We were just looking at a screen.
The score, they play the score sometimes, over the, which is nice, you hear more music, from the composer. I mean, it's terrible.
All right, so we're going to thank you very much for that. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we've got Marjorie, who has another music thing to observe. We've got Anthony, who may be talking about online poker. I'm not exactly sure yet. And John, Utopian Societies / Extinction. Well, that's something to look forward to, right? So stay with us.
Okay.
Hear it? New music? We're trying out new music today. All right, so our number, it's Ask or Tell Me Anything. We have no guests. You can call up about anything, even if your anything does not amount to a hill of beans. It is still welcome. We're not into size here, hill-wise anyway. All right, let's go to Marjorie, then we'll talk to Anthony, then we'll talk to John, and maybe we'll talk to you if you call up during that interval. But here goes Marjorie and Mystic. Hi, you have the floor.
Hello. Mystic. Is Mystic a town or a village? That's my first question.
I think it's a state of mind, but I'm pretty sure Mystic is not an incorporated town, right? Is it? It's all complicated.
It is not as...
Yeah, because...
It's complicated. It's divided by the river between two towns.
Right, so Groton is one of the...
Stonington.
Groton and Stonington, and then there's this Mystic thing, and then... Because I think... And I know McNicol is listening right now, but we did this thing with the librarians down there, and there was like a big argument. It was like a real argument about whether or not we were in Mystic, which seems unreasonable because Mystic doesn't really have any legal boundaries. I could just say I'm in Mystic right now, and I don't see what people could do about that. But okay, but that's not your real point here, is it?
But I will say that because I walk around everywhere, and people often, the only thing they ask me is, how far away is Taylor Swift's house and how long would it take me to walk there? And I say to them, first of all, do you know what state you're in right now?
A disheveled state, perhaps.
And do you have any idea? And she lives in another state, they say Connecticut, that's called Rhode Island. Do you have any idea about how far apart? All right. So that's my Mystic thing.
And she doesn't live there that much anyway. Because I stand outside that house for hours and she's not there, Anyway,
and
continue.
We've seen you.
Yeah.
All right. So, yes, and I live in Mystic and I work in Westerly, so that's really never done. But I grew up with parents who were originally from suburban Detroit. And my father, without telling my mother, got transferred through the Etna to Hartford, Connecticut, and we moved to Pleasant Street in West Hartford. And that's where I spent my early years with my brother, Chuck. And then my dad and my parents always loved music. My mother worked for WXYZ in Detroit. They liked music of all kinds, show tunes. And so we eventually emigrated across Avon Mountain into Collinsville, Connecticut. And the thing that would upset my brother and I, who are just a year apart all the time, is the fact when they started liking popular music, current music,
music that we thought was ours.
Oh, when your
We would
parents,
always hear them
when your parents start to like it, is that
when they started
Yeah.
to like it. So we grew up with them singing show tunes and
Yeah.
and crooners and everything else. But we basically refused to ride with them in cars or go anywhere in public. And they and their friends were involved in a community theater in Collinsville called Canton Benefit Productions. So they kind of like to sing a little bit. But for us, we love music, but they really spoiled it for us when they started in the 70s, dressing a certain way and trying to look groovy.
Yes. First of all, do we know each other? Because I kind of grew up on Pleasant Street too, but maybe we're.
I know who you are because of that. Yes.
Okay.
And I think because maybe our parents knew each other. But
So you're absolutely right, and I mean, most parents are incredibly obliging about not doing what your parents did. For example, I at a certain point thought it was kind of important that my parents at least kind of know who the Beatles were. Well, they kind of did because it was inescapable, but what some of the songs were. And it just turned out that they weren't interested. They didn't want to know about that kind of stuff. Although my father, when he discovered the somewhat obscure Beatles song, Your Mother Should Know, loved that song and thought it was the funniest song he'd ever heard. So you never know. But for the most part, they didn't want any part of it. They didn't want to know about it. There was such an incredible divide. And so you, Marjorie, may have gone to Brayburn Elementary School. Perhaps you did, perhaps you didn't.
yes.
Okay. So when I was in fifth grade, Miss Falcon, the teacher, they would always have music time in your classroom. And then they have this book of these corny old songs, that were, first of all, it didn't occur to us at the time, but these were all songs that were in the public domain. They were songs, written in South Africa in 1898 or something. But anyway, that's sort of what we could sing. And I remember one of my classmates, Peter, said he would never sing. He never sang. And so Ms. Falcon would say, what would it take to get you to sing? And he said, I want to sing songs, songs that we like. He was not very articulate about this, but he was trying to get across the idea that he wanted to sing, songs that he heard on the radio. But it sort of came across, modern songs, new songs. So Ms. Falcon took that under consideration, and a week or two later, she came in with the sheet music to Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious and to Sunrise Sunset. So this is not what Peter was looking for. Peter wanted to sing, Satisfaction or something, or if Peter was going to sing at all. But that's what Miss Falcon thought was meant by current music. And I think it was one of the most incredible musical divides, I think, was that time circa 1964, where it was increasingly clear that rock music was there to stay and would dominate commercially, would dominate the airwaves, dominate record sales. And there was this cohort of parents from the previous generation, the greatest generation parents, who they just couldn't find an on-ramp, except for your parents, apparently, who wrecked it for you. But I think the only thing close to it in my lifetime is the divide about hip-hop. It's a very similar kind of thing, where the hip-hop generation can't imagine a musical world that doesn't have rap and other forms of hip-hop in it. And then the generation preceding it, many of them, baby boomers who liked the Rolling Stones, even though their parents hated them, have become their parents. So I think it does happen. And I think the last thing that, that any 18-year-old, 17-year-old American youth wants is for their parents to get into Lil Baby or something. So it's still, the rule that you're invoking is still very true. All right, let's go along here. First of all, Marjorie, thanks so much for your call. And did you ever find my Frisbee? I've tried to figure out how I was a kid in that same neighborhood. So let's go to Anthony in New Haven. Hi, Anthony. You're on the air.
Hey, Colin. Happy to be back. I'm a 10-time caller.
Wow. Okay, let's get your jacket out. We'll get the velvet jacket out for Anthony. All right.
You've been saying that for 4 calls, and I have not received anything.
Promises.
So I'd like to discuss something that I think is incredibly important, and that is the state of online poker in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
Connecticut actually legalized online poker a few years ago,
mm-hmm.
but the way the law was written and the way, just in terms of implementation, no operator has actually opened a site. And in order to do that, it's complicated, but they would need to join some sort of multi-state online gaming, and that they would have to amend the law in order to do that. Anyway, the reason I have an issue with online poker not being operational in case that wasn't clear from what I've said thus far, is that I watch a lot of football, and I am constantly bombarded with ads for fantasy football, which, although it's classified as a game of skill, really is not. Most people do not make any money. There is no skill involved. It's essentially like playing the lottery. And I'm very confused as to why, the attitude towards games that require no skill or involve very little skill, the lottery, fantasy sports, you can play certain games online on the casino's website, Mohegan Sun or Foxwoods. And yet poker, which is an incredibly complex game, more complex than I ever knew until I started playing. And I'll tell you this, I'm a lawyer. Poker, way more complicated than the law. And I mean that sincerely. Mm-hmm. And yet, and I understand it has this bad reputation. So I guess my question for you, Colin, is why is it that games that don't require any skill are legalized in terms of gambling, and yet an incredibly complex, multifaceted game like poker remains illegal and in some ways looked down upon?
Well, I mean, let's posit, first of all, that I don't necessarily know the answer to this question, but to me, some of it's kind of contained in the grammar of your question. First of all, the assumption would be that more complex and skill-based games ought to take some kind of primacy. They should take precedence over ones that don't, and they should be introduced and regulated by the state. I'm not really sure that that's an idea that everybody accepts as kind of a prior. And I also think that the more complicated something is, the harder it is to regulate. In other words, you need a lot of skill and understanding to play poker effectively. Presumably, you would need some kind of commensurate amount of skill to regulate it. So, and just to back up, and I'm sure you already know this, but for people who don't, when the General Assembly passes a law and the governor signs it, it's kind of the beginning, not the end. And in the legislature, there's something called the Regulations Review Committee, because the next thing that happens, almost invariably, is that regulations have to be promulgated by state agencies saying, that's how we're going to do this, whatever it is that it is going to be legal henceforth to bow hunt Unitarians on Saturdays. Okay, well, who's going to regulate that, and what are the rules, and how are we going to decide, and what are we going to do to people who violate the law, and all that has to happen after the passage of the law. And I'm guessing that's what's happening with online poker. It's one thing to say it's legal. It's another thing to figure out, and I'm sure it's Department of Consumer Protection, which gets saddled with a lot of this kind of stuff. They've got to figure out how to regulate it. And it's more complicated than Powerball. Either you got the numbers right or you didn't, and I think it's also more complicated, as you're suggesting. The game is more complicated than sports betting, because sports betting at least can be set up on some kind of universally graspable rubric. You bet this, you bet the spread, you bet against the spread, whatever it is. Whereas poker, for all the reasons that you're suggesting, may be very, very difficult to regulate, very difficult to come up with an effective set of regulations that everybody could agree on. I will say that you have a friend in Nate Silver, who I think Nate Silver says that his entire career as somebody who's generated a whole new way of thinking about statistics and politics, a statistical understanding of political coverage, it stems from the fact that he was an online poker player. He really cared about it a lot. And then it started to get outlawed in certain states, and there were certain legislators, I think even members of Congress also, that the online poker community got really mad at and wanted to do something about it and wanted to get them out of office. And I think that was, Nate Silver's kind of road to Damascus moment, where he suddenly thought, oh, I should stop worrying so much about poker and figure out how to get these bozos out of office because they're jerks and they're in my way. So you have a friend in Nate Silver.
Well, let me say, I agree with everything you said about the difference, there's a difference between a law being passed and actually being implemented. I would like to push back just a little bit on the idea that gambling games of skill are not superior or more worthy of legalization or sanction than unskilled games.
I wasn't suggesting that they weren't. I mean, they very well might be. They probably are worthy of being played, but they still have to be regulated. What I was suggesting is they might be much more difficult to regulate.
Sure, and I take your point. On games that lack skill are easier to implement. Even though I would argue that if gambling is a vice, games that don't require any skill whatsoever are probably, I would think, lead to more problematic gambling than games that require a high degree of skill and that most people won't even bother with.
Right. I would direct your attention, by the way, John Oliver did a fantastic segment about this. This was years ago on state lotteries. And first of all, on the myth, the lie that these lotteries existed, had been made legal in order to create a revenue stream to fund education, which was said in state after state after state, but turned out to be entirely a myth. So the question is, like, why do we do it? We still do it essentially so states can generate public revenue, put money in their coffers. And that might be another problem with online poker. I don't know, maybe isn't a way to make it pay as much money as some of this other stuff does. But anyway, we have to wrap this up for now. To be continued, Anthony, perhaps on your 11th, 12th, or 13th call. All right, so I think we should go to break now. I'm going to make an alternative decision. So we got John from Middletown on the line. We got Don from Greenwich on the line. You could be on the line too, 888-720-9677. All right, we're back. That, Lake Como, Dave, is a very smooth instrumental version of Love Shack. I'm heading down the Atlanta Highway, looking for a love getaway. All right, so the person who went and located that was Dylan Reyes, the maestro. He's our technical producer. Lily Tyson is our senior producer and is producing this episode. We've had a little sort of seasonal infectious disease problem in the ranks of our producers, so we're not quite getting everything on the air exactly when we want it to get on the air, but Lily has been a Yo person, I think. Yo person, come over here. Anyway, she has been a Yo person and keeping the show going while we wait for other people to feel better. All right, so let's Ask or Tell Me Anything. You can call 888-720-WNPR. That's 888-720-9677. That's what John from Middletown did, and he's up next. Hi, John.
Hey, hi, Colin. And thinking about the climate crisis, I understand that a lot of people have trouble, wrapping their mind around how bad it is, and that it could lead to extinction way before we were considering extinction to be that close. So trouble wrapping their minds around that. But they say, from what I read, they say that it's just a matter of people, listening closely to what the scientists are saying and kind of meditating on it to kind of bring more reality to it. Now, I've been accused of being overly pessimistic and maybe some mental health issues when I bring the subject up. But that was a few years ago. Today, more or less, when I bring it up, I'm considered a realist. And when I think about it, and I think of how as a mankind, womankind, childrenkind. How are we going to turn this around? The one thing, first of all, is just that meditation upon extinction and what that truly means. And the second thing is, huge, talk about Don Quixote and windmills, is to take profit out of our society and bring about a utopian society. So no profits, I'm not, as far as the language, I'm having a little trouble with, but basically, at no point in living your life can someone take advantage of you, or you would want to even take advantage of someone. Just be from the ground up an understanding of how important it is to be good to each other and to be good to each other in the raising of our children and bringing about a community where we are no longer polluting the environment.
Yeah, no, I think that's all. I think what you're saying is very, very, very wise. I think, unfortunately, it's kind of swimming against the tide. I think some of the message that we got. Now, it's important not to overinterpret the results of November 2024 because it was a narrowly contested vote. It wasn't a big landslide or anything like that. But there seemed to be kind of a statement saying you don't really have to think about other people. You don't have to think about future generations of people. You don't have to think about other people who are trying to share the country with you. You don't have to think about any of that. You can just get whatever you want. And I unfortunately, that's exactly the attitude that got us into this mess in the first place. And so, yes, it would be good if people meditated about all that. But I think it's, and look, you're a dreamer, John Lennon and you. I would love for that to be the case. But let me just say one other thing about this, because it is a little bit of a thorn in my side or my paw or something. In the 90s, I started talking about this. I was on a more conservative radio station, commercial radio station. I started talking about what we then called global warming, which was very clear to me it was a reality. It was a reality, and it could do some of the things that it's doing now. And by and large, I was poo-pooed. People was like, it was this kind of format every day. People could call in. They just said I was crazy. And of course, Rush Limbaugh was on the same station. And every day he'd say, the earth has the capacity to heal itself. We don't have to worry about these things. And all kinds of other nonsense. We've had ice ages before. Anyway. And now I look at it now, you look at California, 100-mile-an-hour Santa Ana winds whipping up wildfires. And it should be like just a layup at this point. Yes, that is happening now. This is the kind of weather we haven't seen before, and this is what it can do. And instead, of course, in sort of a magician-like misdirection, we're talking about like DEI and fire departments and stuff. Let's talk about anything except what is really causing this. Because if we talked about that, we'd have to make some of the adjustments that John is talking about. All right, so let me go quickly to Iman. Iman from New Haven. We'll try to get to Don and Dawn and other people who have names kind of like that. But hi, Iman, you have the floor.
Hi, Colin. So I was calling about a question on your show last week. I sent you an email, but it was the robot question that you said, like, what if it becomes a throuple? And I don't know. I felt like in hearing you guys discuss the question, I felt like you all missed the point, that the question really is, first of all, not about like tasks in the house, but about intimacy, because that's what relationships are about. And
so just to back up for people who weren't listening last week, there was a call, and I hope I'm summarizing it correctly, from somebody who said, who, as kind of a thought experiment, what would it be like to have a kind of a third member of your marriage or your
that wasn't the question either. It was, what if your wife had a robot boyfriend who looked like Glenn Powell?
No, I did that part of it. He didn't ask that. He didn't bring
exactly.
that up.
You added in the like throuple dynamic, which is a very different
and the Glenn Powell part. But no, I was trying to say what the caller first said. I think the caller said, what would that be like if, in fact, you and your wife, or one and one's wife or one's partner, had a third person who was a robot? It was the wife had a boyfriend, a robot boyfriend. So it's like, we're going to have to do a booth review on this.
Yes,
we're going to have to do a booth review. Okay, we'll do a booth review for next week on this and see, because we're going to be chasing our tails here. All right. Thanks, Iman. Here is Don in Greenwich. Hi, Don.
Yeah. Hi, Colin. How you doing?
Good.
fifth-time caller. Last time I called, I was in Grand Central Station, but I've since found more permanent accommodations here in Greenwich. I'm calling about your show last week about the canon, in which you confessed to a certain inability to mount the passion and the affection for the bear that everybody seems to be afflicted by these days. And it reminded me of a article in the online New York Times recently, where apparently they asked somebody to write an article about why does everybody love the bear? And this article was basically 500 words adding up to, really, I can't quite put it into words, which is not what we're looking for in an article in the Times. But eventually this person said, what I would do is just refer you to a cartoon in the New Yorker that sort of captures it better than I could do. And this cartoon in the New Yorker pictures two people naked in a disheveled bed, and it's clear that they have just shared or just enjoyed carnal knowledge and not the movie. And the caption of the cartoon is, "Gee, honey, that was great, but what was all that Yes Chef stuff?"
Okay, that's a pretty funny cartoon, actually. Let me just say this. First of all, this, one thing that I didn't bring up on that show, but it's occurred to me since, there was a very funny web series called Tiny Apartment in the very, very beginning of the time there were even web series at all. It's called Tiny Apartment, and one of the episodes was about this, the whole thing was about this New York couple in a little apartment, and they were being bullied by their friends about The Wire. You have to watch The Wire, have to watch The Wire, and have to watch The Wire. And that was, The Wire was the bear of its day. And I probably was a little bit more on the bullying spectrum, at least I thought it was a really, really important and great TV show. And then there were people who just never wanted to watch The Wire, and that was kind of fine. But I do think, Don, and I sense from your tone of voice that you might agree with me, it reached its absurdity in the Golden Globes, where you have Best Actor in a Comedy Series. And so in that category, you have people like Steve Martin and Martin Short and Ted Danson and his thing. And the winner was Jeremy Allen White from The Bear because of his incredible comedic abilities, his ability to make us laugh every time we watch an episode of The Bear, which doesn't happen. Nobody laughs at Jeremy Allen White. He's not that funny. He's upset. He's worried. He thinks he's going to lose all of his money. He's got crazy relatives. He's got loans, but not in a funny way. That's not funny. It just makes you nervous. Anyway, I'll stop. But thanks for your call. I'm sorry we didn't get to you, Dawn, but we will get to you next time if you call.